What did you people cook? I smell something like chicken. Ogechi's heart thudded. Oh, I made yam porridge just with a little crayfish, she lied, trying to sound casual. The smell of chicken was still in the air, though faint. Chris stepped into the kitchen area. He noticed the covered basin on the floor and the unease on everyone's faces. Before he could probe further, little Ifatu skipped up to him, oblivious to the tension. Daddy, Ifatu chirped, reaching out to be carried. Chris managed a smile and lifted his youngest son. The boy beamed and said, Daddy, we had chicken today. Uncle Chideko bought us chicken and said we should finish it before you come back. Ogechi first met Chris on a bright Sunday after church in Owerri. He was soft-spoken and respectful, a young civil servant with a steady job. During their courtship, one thing bothered Ogechi. Chris hardly spent money on her, while other suitors bought gifts or took their girlfriends out for pepper soup and drinks. Chris was different. He never gave Ogechi any money for personal needs or treats, not even the small love token that many boyfriends would offer. At first, she tried to understand. Perhaps he was just being careful or saving for the future. After all, he always said, we must manage and not waste money. One evening, Ogechi returned home from his simple outing with Chris, feeling a bit disappointed. They had only strolled through a local market and shared a single bottle of mineral soda because Chris said he wasn't hungry. He rarely took her to restaurants or bought her new clothes. In private, she confided in her mother about this. Mama, is it normal? Ogechi asked one day, sitting on a low stool in her mother's kitchen. Chris hardly spends on me. Even when I hint that I need something, he just smiles and says I should be patient. Her mother was a practical Igbo woman with wise eyes. She sliced okra into a pot as she listened to her daughter's worries. My daughter, don't worry yourself too much, No, Ogechi replied calmly. Some men are like that before marriage. Once you marry him, he will change. If he doesn't know how to take care of your woman, we will teach him. After the wedding, he will learn to provide like a proper husband. Ogechi nodded slowly, trying to be reassured. Her mother believed that marriage itself would soften Chris's tight hold on money. In Igbo culture, a man is expected to provide for his wife and family. Ogechi was confident that with a little motherly advice and a wife's influence at home, Chris would open up his pocket. Chris had other good qualities that gave Ogechi hope. He was God-fearing, attended church regularly, and didn't go out drinking or chasing other women. He treated her with respect and listened to her opinions on many things except when it came to money. On that topic, he always fell silent or gave vague assurances. Times are hard, but things will get better soon, he would often say, without explaining further. When Chris formally came to ask for her hand in marriage, he brought the traditional bride price and gifts as required by custom. The ceremony was modest. He negotiated carefully, ensuring the bride price wasn't too high. Some of Ogechi's relatives murmured that he seemed economical, even during the marriage arrangement, but her mother defended him. He's just prudent. Being careful with money is better than being a spendthrift, Mama Ogechi said. Ogechi loved Chris and trusted her mother's wisdom. On their wedding day, she was full of hope, dressed in a white gown at the church in Owerri, Municipal. She looked at Chris in his simple but neat suit. He didn't throw naira notes in the air in flashy dance as some do. Instead, he was reserved. Still, Ogechi believed that once they settled into their new life, they would build a happy home together. She imagined a future where, as husband and wife, they would face life hand in hand, sharing joys and burdens. As they moved into a two-room and parlor apartment in the city after the wedding, Ogechi remembered her mother's words. Now that I am his wife, I will see a new side of him. She told herself, hopefully. She was ready to help Chris become the generous, caring provider she knew he could be. But as the days of their marriage began, Ogechi would soon discover that some habits and some secrets do not simply disappear after you say I do. The first weeks of marriage quickly taught Ogechi that Chris' frugal habits were not going away. If anything, they became even more obvious. After the small wedding, there was no luxurious honeymoon, just a quiet return to their cramped two-room and parlor apartment in Owerri. Ogechi tried to set up their new home cheerfully, arranging the few wedding gifts in the parlor and unpacking her clothes. But it didn't take long before money issues surfaced. In their first week living together, Ogechi realized that Chris expected her to manage the household with almost nothing. When she asked him for money to go to the relief market to buy foodstuffs, he refused, saying it's just the two of them and they can manage. And this kept on going for so many years. As years went by, Ogechi and Chris had two children, and two of Chris's younger siblings also moved in to live with them. Now, there are six in that same house. Anytime she asked for money, Chris will shook his head. Instead, he opened a small cupboard in the kitchen where he hid all the foodstuffs he bought and measured out some staples for himself. He handed her a plastic container with what looked like a small quantity of rice and a few cups of gari, cassava flakes. This should be enough for a few days, he said, his tone matter of fact. Ogechi stared at the container of rice in disbelief. It was such a meager amount. Chris, this rice might not even last today, talk less of a few days, he protested softly. The household was not just the two of them. It included his two younger siblings and their two small children. In total, 6 people would eat from whatever she cooked. Chris frowned, clearly displeased by any challenge. Don't worry, it will be enough if you cook it well. You young women always think nothing is ever enough. We must manage. Manage. That word again. It seemed to be his solution for everything. Reluctantly, Ogechi prepared the meal with what he provided. She made a thin soup with dried fish and a handful of vegetables, stretching the ingredients as far as possible. That afternoon, a family of 6 sat on a mat in the parlor to eat. Chris insisted on serving everyone personally. He dished out small portions of rice and soup into each bowl carefully, as if performing a delicate operation. When it came to the only 2 pieces of meat in the soup, Chris did something that made Ogechi feel a lump in her throat. He took one piece of meat, brought it to his mouth, and bit it into smaller pieces with his teeth before spitting the pieces back into the children's bowls. He did the same with the second piece, tearing it so that each person got a tiny chunk. The children, Chibuna and Ifatu, looked at their father with wide eyes. Little Ifatu, only 4 years old, seemed puzzled but too hungry to question it. Chibuna, who was around 6, quietly chewed the piece of meat without a word. Ogechi forced a smile at her children, but inside she was both heartbroken and angry. She had grown up in a modest home, but she was not used to this level of deprivation. They all ate in silence, the only sound being the faint clink of spoons against bowls. The food was barely enough. Each person's portion disappeared almost as soon as it touched the plate. After lunch, everyone went about their afternoon quietly. Chijioke, Chris's younger brother, helped to pack up the plate. His face was drawn. At 19, he should have been a vibrant young man, but the recent scanty meals had left him looking thin and weak. His teenage sister, Adora, swept the parlor silently. There was a heavy feeling in the house, a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and hunger. Later that evening, Ogechi tried to talk to her husband gently. The children were napping in the corner of the parlor, and Chijioke and Adora had gone outside to get some fresh air. She found Chris sitting at a small table in their bedroom, calculating something on paper. My husband, Ogechi began softly, standing by the door. I wanted to discuss the housekeeping money. or maybe buying more food. The rice is almost finished already after one day. The kids are still little. They get hungry again so fast. Chris did not look up from his paper. I know they get hungry, but we have to cut our coat according to our size, Ogechi, he said curtly. She took a step closer, trying to remain calm. I understand, but perhaps I could go to the market myself and see what I can get with a small extra amount. Even Gary and beans, something cheap, just so we have enough. The children, even your brother and sister, they are not eating well. At that, Chris looked up, his expression hard. Are you saying I cannot take care of my own family? He asked sharply. Ogechi's throat tightened. No, that's not what I said. I mean, it's just I'm worried. Everyone is looking lean, even you. And the little money you give me, it doesn't go far with food prices so high now. Indeed, the cost of basic ingredients like rice had surged across Nigeria in recent times. But Chris still wouldn't budge in providing more money for the kitchen. Chris pushed back his chair and stood up. For a moment, Ogechi felt a flicker of fear that he might shout or worse, strike her, but he simply walked past her to the kitchen. He returned with another small cup of garri and placed it on the table. Here, he said stiffly, add this garri if the children are still hungry. They can soak it in water with a little sugar for dinner. Ogechi looked at the cup of garri. It was not even filled to the brim. She opened her mouth to speak, to say that this was not enough, but Chris's expression stopped her. His face was closed, like a locked door. Without another word, he sat back down and resumed his calculations on paper, effectively dismissing her concerns. That night, Ogechi did as he said. She soaked the garri in water, added a pinch of salt and the tiniest sprinkle of sugar to make a watery cereal. The family sat on a woven mat on the floor to have their dinner. Chris measured out teaspoons of sugar for each cup of soaked garri, counting carefully so that no one got a grain more than the other. In the dim light of the single bulb, electricity was intermittent, so they had a lantern ready. Ogechi watched her children swallow the bland meal. Adora quietly gave a portion of her garri to little Ifatu, who was still hungry, pretending that she wasn't hungry herself. Chijioke ate slowly, trying to make his small bowl last longer. No one laughed or chatted during meal as a normal family night. They simply ate, each lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared for bed, Ogechi felt a wave of despair wash over her. This was not the picture of marriage she had dreamed of. Where was the joy of cooking hearty meals for her family, of seeing her children well fed and happy? Instead, she felt like she was presiding over a household slowly wilting from hunger. Before sleeping, she tried one more time to reach out to Chris. The darkness of their small bedroom, with the sounds of the city night outside, a distant generator hum, a baby crying next door, vehicles on the road, she whispered, Chris, is everything alright? You know, with money, I feel like maybe you have some troubles you are not telling me. He was silent for a long time. She wondered if he had fallen asleep, but then he replied in a low voice, everything is fine. Stop worrying so much. Times are just hard now. Good night, Ogechi. He turned his back, ending the discussion. Ogechi wiped a silent tear from her eye and stared at the ceiling. She thought of her mother's promise that he would change after marriage. Instead, things seemed even worse. Why is he like this? She wondered miserably. In the darkness, with her stomach empty and aching, Ogechi had no answers. Only the quiet resolve that somehow she had to keep her family from falling apart under the weight of Chris's stinginess. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The frustration in the household remained unchanged. If anything, it got worse. The tight rationing continued every single day. Morning, afternoon, and night, Ogechi stretched whatever small quantities of food Chris provided. The children, and even the adults, were losing weight visibly. Little Ifatu's once plump cheeks became sunken, and Chibuna's school uniform started hanging loosely on his frame. 19-year-old Chijioke developed a hollow look in his eyes. Even Chris himself grew lean, though he never admitted that the meager meals were the cause. Hunger became a constant, uninvited guest in their home. Ogechi often woke up with hunger pains in her stomach. She would drink a cup of water to push back the gnawing feeling and get on with her day. Food was too precious to eat until it was mealtime, and mealtimes were strictly controlled by Chris. Despite the hardship, Chris stuck to his habits rigidly. Every morning, he would carefully allocate the day's provisions. For example, he might measure 1 cup of garri for breakfast for all of them to share as a tin porridge. In the afternoon, he would leave exactly 3 cups of rice for Ogechi to cook with perhaps a few pieces of crayfish or a drop of palm oil for flavor. In the evening, it might be beans, just 2 cups, cooked plainly with salt. He made sure nothing was ever excess. If Ogechi quietly added a little extra from her own secret stash of spices or bitter leaf to improve the taste, Chris would notice and question her, asking if she was being wasteful. One afternoon, as Ogechi stirred a small pot of watery beans on the stove, she felt lightheaded. She hadn't eaten anything since the night before except a sip of tea, without milk or sugar. The room felt as if it were spinning. She quickly sat down on a stool to steady herself. Adora, who was helping to pick out stones from the beans earlier, noticed and rushed to her side. "Auntie, are you okay?" Adora asked softly, concern in her eyes. Ogechi managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, my dear, just a little dizzy. The heat from the stove." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to say more. Adora knew the real reason. At 16, Adora was old enough to understand what the women in the house often ate less, so the children could have a bit more. Adora herself often pretended not to be hungry during meals, just to leave more for her nephews, Chibuna and Ifatu. That day, the beans barely filled half of a small pot. When Chris came home from work, he looked at it and nodded approvingly. To him, a half pot meant nothing was wasted. He sat everyone down for dinner and as usual served out the portions. Each person got just a few spoonfuls. The children's eyes were dull as they ate. They had learned not to complain, but their silence was heartbreaking. After dinner, little Ifat talked at Ogechi's wrapper. "Mama, I'm still hungry," the 4-year-old whispered, looking up with pleading eyes. Ogechi's throat tightened. She had no hidden food to give. She took her son on her lap and tried to console him. "I know, my son. Just drink some water, okay? Tomorrow will be better, I promise," she said, stroking his back. But in her heart, she felt like she was lying. She had made that promise before and nothing had improved. Chibuna, the older child, put on a brave face. "Ifatu, come, let's play our game," he said to his little brother, trying to distract him. The two boys went to a corner of the parlor where they used bottle caps and sticks to play a make-believe game. Watching them, Ogechi felt a mix of pride and sorrow. At such a young age, Chibuna was already learning to endure hardship and take care of his sibling. Children should be carefree, she thought, not worried about when the next meal would come. In those difficult days, the atmosphere in the home grew tense. Ogechi and Chris barely spoke beyond necessary exchanges. Ogechi's initial attempts to reason with him had all been shut down. She had cried, begged, even gotten angry once. Raising her voice to ask why he was treating them like beggars, Chris had reacted coldly, saying she was disrespectful to question him as the head of the house. After that explosive argument, during which he stormed out of the house to cool off, Ogechi decided to keep her anguish to herself. Talking to Chris felt like talking to a wall. At night, Ogechi would lie awake on the thin mattress, silently crying or just staring into the darkness. More often than not, she found that Chris was also awake, though he pretended to be asleep. She could tell by his breathing, uneven and heavy, that he too carried some inner turmoil. Sometimes, she even heard him sigh or whisper in Igbo, saying something like, "Chinekem, mere mere bere, God, have mercy on me," when he thought she was asleep. It was a clue that perhaps he was struggling with something, but his pride kept him from confiding in her. One weekend, a strange incident occurred that further puzzled Ogechi. A stern-looking middle-aged man came to their door early on a Saturday morning. Ogechi was cleaning the front step when the visitor arrived. "Yes, can I help you?" she asked politely. The man looked at her, then at a slip of paper in his hand. "I'm looking for Mr. Christopher Obi," he said formally. "He's my husband. He's not at home right now." Ogechi replied, curious. Chris had stepped out barely half an hour earlier, saying he had to see a friend. It was unusual for someone to come looking for him at home on a weekend. The man frowned. "When will he be back?" "It's an urgent matter." Before Ogechi could answer, Chris appeared at the street corner, walking quickly toward them. He had in his hand a small brown envelope. Ogechi recognized it. It was the kind of envelope he used to keep cash. Her heart skipped a beat as a worrying thought flashed through her mind. Was he giving money to this man while his family went hungry? Chris reached them and gave a tight smile. "Ah, Mr. Okafor, you came. I was just on my way to meet you," he said, sounding a bit nervous. The man, Mr. Okafor, barely returned the smile. "I wouldn't need to come if you answered your phone, Mr. Obi," he said in a cool voice. Chris cast a quick glance at Ogechi. "Go inside, I will handle this," he said to her quietly. Ogechi opened her mouth to protest. She wanted to know what was happening, but the look on Chris's face told her not to push. With a knot in her stomach, she obeyed and went back inside, peeking through the window. She watched as Chris handed the brown envelope to Mr. Okafor. The man opened it, counted what looked like money, and then spoke sternly to Chris. Though Ogechi couldn't hear all the words, she caught fragments through the window. Next installment, delay again, and consequences. She kept nodding and saying, "Yes, sir, I understand, sir. It won't happen again, sir." After a few tense minutes, the visitor walked away, and Chris remained standing outside for a moment, rubbing his forehead. When he finally came in, Ogechi pretended she had not been watching. Her mind was racing. Next installment, delay. The encounter looked like Chris was paying this man money that could have bought food for the family. She wanted so badly to ask him about it right then and there, but she was afraid of his reaction and afraid of what the answer might be. Chris had kept her in the dark about finances for so long. By now, she hardly knew anything about his earnings or spendings. He gave her just enough for the barest groceries and nothing more. If he was giving money outside, what did that mean? That night, as they lay in silence, Ogechi mustered the courage to approach the subject indirectly. "Someone came by today looking for you," she said softly. She felt him stiffen beside her in the dark. "Who?" he asked flatly, though she was sure he knew. He said his name is Mr. Okafor. Seemed like an important matter. Chris was silent for a long while. Then he simply said, "It was work related. Don't worry about it. Stop poke nosing." Stone was final. There it was again. The wall. Ogechi bit her lip, swallowing all the other questions burning in her throat. Why couldn't he just trust her enough to tell her what was going on? With each passing day, Ogechi's sorrow and frustration grew. She did her best to shield the children from the worst of it, forcing smiles for their sake, telling them stories at bedtime about happy families and plentiful food, fantasies that only made her heart ache more. The love and warmth she had hoped to fill her home with were replaced by cold, hard silence and the constant worry of survival. In quiet moments, her mind drifted back to the early days of their relationship, when her mother had assured her that she could change Chris. How naive that seemed now. If anything, it felt like Chris's stinginess or whatever drove him to deprive them was changing her. She was becoming someone she didn't recognize, a shadow of herself, skinner, sadder, and full of resentment. Still, she held onto a thread of hope. Perhaps, she thought, something would change soon. Maybe a miracle would happen, a promotion at Chris's job, or a change of heart in him. She prayed silently each night for God to provide for them and to touch Chris's heart, but as of yet, That prayer went unanswered. Little did Ogechi know that the faint glimmer of hope would not come from a sudden miracle or from Chris waking up one day a different man. It would come from within the house itself, from someone who had been watching the suffering quietly and who could no longer bear to see his family in pain. Chijioke could no longer ignore the suffering around him. He watched day after day as his sister-in-law and the children went hungry. He saw how his little nephew's energy faded and how even his strong-willed brother Chris grew more gaunt. Chijioke was just a youth with little to his name, but he felt he had to do something. One afternoon, while Chris was away at work, Chijioke pulled Ogechi aside in the kitchen. Adora was keeping the children busy in the parlor, telling them a folktale to distract them from their empty stomachs. "Auntie Oge," Chijioke began in a low voice, using auntie as a sign of respect, though she was only a few years older than him. "Please, I want to help. I have a little money saved from the small jobs I did during my IT industrial training. It's not much, but I can buy some extra food." Ogechi looked at her brother-in-law with surprise and relief in her eyes. "Chijioke, you don't have to," she started, but her voice trembled, betraying how desperately she wanted the help. "I know I don't have to," he said, "but I want to. I can't keep watching everyone go hungry." He paused, glancing toward the parlor, where the children's soft giggles at Adora's story could be heard. In a quieter voice, he added, "Biko, please just allow me. Dede doesn't need to know." Ogechi's resolve crumbled. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. It was the first ray of kindness she had felt in a long time. That evening, Chijioke slipped out and returned with a small black nylon bag. Inside were 2 smoked fish, a bunch of ugu leaves, pumpkin leaves for soup, some garri, and even a little groundnut paste. When Ogechi saw these ingredients, she nearly cried for joy. With Adora's help, she quickly made a richer soup than they had had in months, along with eba, garri paste for everyone. The aroma of real food, not just watery broth, filled the tiny kitchen and wafted into the living area. Chibuna and Ifatu ran to the kitchen, eyes wide. "Mama, what are you cooking? It smells good," Chibuna asked, almost forgetting to maintain the quiet demeanor he had adopted too. Ogechi flashed a genuine smile at her children. "It's a surprise. Go wash your hands. Food will soon be ready," she said. Usually, they would wait for Chris to return before eating dinner, but tonight, Chijioke insisted they eat first. "We'll tell Dede that the kids were too hungry to wait," he said. That was true enough, but the real reason was that he wanted them to finish the food before Chris could see it, in case he got angry. They all sat on the mat and Ogechi served generous portions of hot soup with pieces of fish and eba. The children's faces lit up in disbelief. Adora quietly closed the curtains and door to ensure no neighbor or Chris, if he came unexpectedly early, would see them feasting a bit more than usual. For the first time in a long time, there was lively chatter at the meal. Ifatu grinned as he bit into a fish piece. "Uncle Chiji, this is so nice," he exclaimed, his voice full of innocent happiness. Chijioke laughed softly. "Eat well, my little man." Ogechi felt warmth in her heart, watching the kids eat to their fill. Even she and Adora ate a good portion. Her stomach, which had shrunk from constant hunger, protested a little at the larger meal, but it was a good feeling, a reminder of what it meant to be content after eating. When Chris came home later that night, the family was already done with dinner. The pots and plates were cleaned and put away. The children were quietly doing homework by lantern light. Ogechi was darning a shirt, and Adora was cutting little Ifatu's hair. It looked like an ordinary evening. Chris, tired and unaware of earlier feast, didn't suspect a thing. He merely commented that the house smelled different. Ogechi quickly replied that she had tried a new seasoning with the little they had. Chris shrugged it off and soon went to bed, none the wiser. This secret arrangement went on for some time. Whenever Chijioke had a bit of money, he would buy bread, fruit, or a small portion of meat from the open market and smuggle it home. The family learned to eat this treat quickly and hide the evidence. They would leave just the normal meager portions in the pot for Chris to see. On those days, the children looked healthier and slept more soundly with fuller stomachs. Ogechi, grateful and yet anxious, prayed they would not get caught. But secrets have a way of coming out, and one fateful day, the truth emerged in the most innocent of ways. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Chris had gone out to a nearby barbing salon to get a haircut. Chijioke seized the opportunity to bring home a special treat. He had saved up enough to buy a small chicken, not a whole chicken, but cut portions of it, and some yams. He and Ogechi prepared a simple but hearty meal of yam porridge with chicken peas. The aroma was mouth-watering, and the children could hardly contain their excitement. Remember, eat fast and don't tell daddy, Chijioke reminded everyone as they sat down to enjoy the rare feast. Adora stood watched by the window, looking out for any sign of Chris returning. They finished the meal in record time, laughing a bit and feeling for once like a normal happy family. Ogechi even sang an old Igbo folk song softly as she gathered the plates, something she used to do when in good spirits. Just as Ogechi was wiping the last traces of soup from the pot, they heard the gate creak. Chris was back earlier than expected. Adora hadn't even seen him coming until he was at the door. In a panic, Ogechi quickly hid the cooking pot under a basin, and Chijioke hastily tossed the chicken bones into a trash bag, tying it up. Chris entered the parlor and immediately sensed something was off. Perhaps it was the slightly greasy shine on the children's lips, or the way everyone suddenly felt silent and stiff. "What's going on?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Welcome." "No," Ogechi said, her voice a bit too bright. "How was the barber?" "Fine," Chris answered slowly. His eyes darted around. He sniffed the air. "What did you people cook? I smell something like chicken." Ogechi's heart thudded. "Oh, I made yam porridge just with a little crayfish," she lied, trying to sound casual. The smell of chicken was still in the air, though faint. Chris stepped into the kitchen area. He noticed the covered basin on the floor and the unease on everyone's faces. Before he could probe further, little Ifeatu skipped up to him, oblivious to the tension. "Daddy," Ifeatu chirped, reaching out to be carried. Chris managed a smile and lifted his youngest son. The boy beamed and said, "Daddy, we had chicken today. Uncle Chijioke bought us chicken and said we should finish it before you come back." Time seemed to freeze. Ogechi felt the blood drain from her face. Chibunna dropped the book he had been pretending to read. Adora covered her mouth in shock, and Chijioke closed his eyes briefly as if bracing for a blow. Chris set Ifeatu down slowly. The little boy, sensing too late that he had broken some unspoken rule, scurried behind his mother's legs. "So," Chris said in a low voice that crackled with anger, "this is what has been happening in my house." He turned fairy eyes on Chijioke. So you have become the man of the house now, eh? Buying food as if I cannot provide?" Chijioke stepped back, his hands up defensively. "Dede, I was only trying to help. The children, they were hungry." "Shut up," Chris roared. It was rare for him to raise his voice like this. The sudden thunder in his tone made everyone flinch. "I feed my family with what I have. Who are you to decide it's not enough?" Ogechi found her voice trembling. "Chris, please, he's just..." "Keep out of this, Ogechi," Chris snapped, a sharp edge in his voice that cut her off. She stood frozen, holding little Ifeatu's hand tightly. Chibunna had started quietly crying in a corner, scared by the shouting. Adora moved to comfort him, her own eyes wet. Chris advanced toward Chijioke, fury in every step. "After everything, you dare undermine me? Under my own roof?" he shouted. "Do you want to show me up? To make me look like a useless man in front of my wife and children?" Chijioke's face contorted with a mix of fear and anger. "Dede, that's not it. I swear, I only wanted to help. You weren't providing enough and I couldn't watch them suffer." The words slipped out before he could stop them. It was the wrong thing to say. Chris lunged and slapped the plastic bowl off the table, sending it clattering to the floor. Get out, he bellowed. If you think I'm so incapable, then you have no place under my roof. He stormed into the room that Chijioke and Adora shared. In a frenzy, he grabbed Chijioke's few belongings, a faded duffel bag, some clothes, and flung them into the corridor. Outside the apartment, Adora cried, "Tede, please!" as one of her own headscarves got tossed out in the mix. Neighbors began peeking out of their doors, drawn by the commotion. It was a busy compound with multiple tenants, and now all eyes were on the obese family's disgrace. Ogechi rushed to Chris, daring to grab his arms. "Chris, stop this! People are watching," she pleaded. He shook her off angrily. "Let them watch. Let them see what a traitor I have been harboring." He pointed a shaking finger at Chijioke. "I took care of you since father died, and this is how you repay me? By trying to turn my family against me? By trying to steal the respect of my wife and children? Do you think feeding them behind my back makes you head of this house?" Chijioke stood at the door, tears of frustration in his eyes. "I never meant any disrespect, Dede," he said weakly. "Just go," Chris barked, his voice hoarse. "Before I do something worse, leave my house." Chijioke looked at Ogechi helplessly. She wanted to go to him, to at least give him some money or a hug, something. But Chris's presence was like a barrier of fire. Adora quickly slipped on her slippers and ran outside, picking up the scattered clothes and stuffing them into the duffel bag. She took Chijioke's hand. "I'm going with him," she said in a small voice, looking defiantly at her elder brother. "Fine, go, both of you. Leave my house," Chris yelled, "and don't come back." Ogechi covered her face in her hands, ashamed and heartbroken, as she watched Chijioke and Adora walk away down the compound corridor. Chijioke paused once to look back, perhaps hoping that his brother would relent, but Chris had already turned his back, dragging a stunned Chibuna into the house and shutting the door. Inside the apartment, the silence was deafening. After the door slammed, Chris stood in the middle of the parlor, chest heaving with rage. Ogechi moved to pick up a chair that had fallen during the chaos, her hands shaking. Little Ifeatu clung to her wrapper, sobbing softly in confusion. Chibuna stood against the wall, tears streaming down his face, too scared to move. That night, the household felt emptier than ever. Chijioke and Adora were gone, sent away in anger. The remaining family ate nothing. The pot of yam porridge with chicken had been thrown out in the commotion, and no one had the appetite or will to cook again. The home that had briefly known the smell of good food and the sound of laughter that afternoon now felt cold and hostile. Bitterness hung in the air like a foul odor. Chris sat alone in the parlor, a dark look on his face, while Ogechi comforted the children in the bedroom, tears in her eyes. Any remaining illusion of peace or normalcy had been shattered. The fragile threads holding the family together were now strained to the breaking point. And Ogechi could not see how they would ever mend. The days following Chijioke and Adora's departure were the blackest Ogechi had ever lived through. The apartment felt emptier and heavier at the same time, empty of the two siblings who had brought some light, and heavy with unresolved tension. Chris barely spoke a word, either out of lingering anger or buried guilt. Ogechi went about her duties like a ghost, turning to the children in silence. Even little Ifeatu, usually bubbly, was subdued after witnessing his beloved uncle and auntie thrown out. There were fewer mouths to feed now, but the atmosphere was so poisoned that it hardly mattered. Chris continued in his old ways. If anything, he became even more withdrawn. He would leave a bit more food than before, perhaps rationalizing that with two less people, the proportions would stretch. But any relief that gave was overshadowed by the emotional distance between husband and wife. One evening, about a week after the incident, 6-year-old Chibuna developed a fever. Ogechi suspected it was due to the stress and undernourishment catching up with him. The boy lay on a mat, cheeks flushed and breathing heavily. Worried, Ogechi knew the child needed proper care, maybe medicine or at least nourishing food to regain strength. She gently sponged his body with cool water and tried to feed him some tin pap. When Chris returned from work, she went to talk to him. Chibuna is running a fever, she said quietly, trying not to sound accusatory. I think we should take him to the clinic or buy some Panadol syrup for him. Chris looked at his son lying listlessly in Ogechi's arms. He frowned with concern, but then his face hardened in that familiar way. He will be fine. Chris said flatly, it's probably just common fever. Let him rest. He will recover. Ogechi felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Recover on what? Water? He needs medicine. Maybe better food. He's weak. Can't you see? Her voice shook as she fought back tears. Chris glanced away. Tomorrow, I will see if I can borrow some medicine from a colleague. He mumbled. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Ogechi pressed her lips together and tended to her son through the night, using only the basic remedies they had. Thankfully, by morning, Chibuna's fever broke on its own, but the scar had pushed Ogechi to a new edge. She realized that she and the children could very well suffer something worse if this situation continued. It was no longer just about being hungry, it was about survival. What if one of them fell seriously ill or got injured? Would Chris's pride keep him from spending on a doctor or medicine? The frightening answer she suspected was yes. That morning, Ogechi made up her mind. She could no longer bear this. This was not the life she had signed up for. And she feared for her children's future if they stayed in this environment. After the children fell asleep that night, Ogechi approached Chris in the parlor. He was sitting on the old couch, staring blankly at a newspaper that he hadn't turned a page of in an hour. The single bulb cast harsh shadows, highlighting how weary and thin they both had become. Chris, she called softly. His name felt heavy on her tongue. He looked up, guarded. What is it? Ogini? Ogechi took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling, but she had to do this. We need to talk. She sat down, not too close to him, and fixed her eyes on her worn sandals. Unable to meet his gaze at first. This marriage, she began slowly. I can't continue like this. Chris said nothing, but she sensed him tense up. She forced herself to continue. I have tried. God knows I have tried to be patient, to support you despite everything. But I am tired, Chris. I am exhausted and broken. You won't let me in. You won't let me help you, or even help our children properly. Her voice caught, and she finally raised her eyes to see him watching her intently. I want a divorce. The word hung in the air, sharp and irrevocable. In the dim light, she saw Chris's face change. First, his eyes widened in shock, then instantly glistened as tears gathered. She had never seen him cry in all the years she had known him. Chris was a proud man who always kept his emotions tightly controlled, but now it was as if a dam had broken. He covered his face with his hands. To her astonishment, a sob escaped him, a sound of pure despair. Ogechi, please, he choked out between sobs. Ogechi was stunned. She had expected anger or denial, maybe harsh words, not this. Unsure, she reached out a hand and touched his shoulder lightly. Chris, she whispered, feeling her own tears welling up. Chris lowered his head. His eyes were red and overflowing. Once, he started to cry. He couldn't stop. Years of stress and secret pain poured out in those tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, he managed to say. Ogechi had never seen him so vulnerable. She sat there, hand on his shoulder, her own griefness momentarily forgotten. After what felt like minutes of him struggling to regain his voice, she began to speak haltingly at first, then in a rush, as if a floodgate had opened. You think I'm wicked? That I enjoy watching you and the kids suffer? He said, voice trembling. God knows I don't. I never meant to hurt you or them. He wiped his face with his sleeve, still unable to meet her gaze. I have been carrying a burden, a secret for years, since before we even married. Ogechi stayed silent, her heart pounding. She had steeled herself for many possibilities, but not for what she was about to hear. Chris took a deep breath, then continued, staring at a spot on the floor as if ashamed. When my father died, he left a huge debt behind, a debt from some loans he took. I was the first son, freshly out of uni, and had just gotten my government job. The creditors came after me immediately, threatening to disgrace our family name, to seize what little we had, even to harm my mother and all of us. He paused, swallowing hard. Ogechi listened, eyes wide. This was the first time he had ever spoken of his late father owing money. I couldn't let that happen, Chris said, shaking his head. I was young and proud. I felt it was my responsibility to clean up his mess silently. So I made a decision. I used every kobo of my salary to start paying back those debts. I lived on practically nothing. I didn't tell anyone, not my mother, not my siblings, certainly not you when we met. I was too ashamed. Papa's debts were massive. He had borrowed from banks, from cooperatives, even from some local money lenders. The interest was piling up. If people knew, it would ruin our family's reputation, and I wanted to be seen as a capable first son, not someone begging for help. Ogechi felt tears streaming down her face as she absorbed his words. Chris continued, voice filled with sorrow. By the time we got married, I had barely made a dent in what was owed. I thought I could handle it alone. I thought maybe in a few years, I would quietly finish paying it off, and then things would be normal. I believed that if I just tightened all spending and endured for some time, I could shield you from the shame and stress. I didn't want to dump my father's sins on you or your family, so I hid it. I hid everything, thinking I was protecting everyone by doing so. He let out a bitter laugh at that, wiping his nose. What a foolish thing pride can be. Instead of protecting my family, I ended up starving you all of peace and comfort. I have been so blind. His shoulder shook as he cried again, quieter this time. Ogechi's mind was racing through the past years, and suddenly many things made sense. The constant penny pinching, his refusal to talk about money, the mysterious man Mr. Okafor she now realized likely a creditor at their door, the reason he never entertained even small luxuries. It was not that he didn't love them or was innately cruel. He was struggling desperately under a burden she never knew about. She felt a mix of heartache and relief. Heartache that he had gone through this alone and put them all through so much misery in the process. Relief that there was finally an explanation, and that maybe, just maybe, the man she loved wasn't a heartless misser after all. Chris, she said softly, moving closer. Why? Why didn't you tell me? There was no anger in her voice now, only hurt. Didn't you trust me enough? We could have faced it together. He shook his head, tears still glistening. I was afraid, Oge. Afraid and ashamed. How could I stand before you, before your mother and our whole family, and admit that we had nothing? That my salary was gone before it even came, because of a dead man's death? In our culture, the man is expected to take care of his household. I didn't want anyone to look down on me or pity me, so I tried to handle it quietly. I thought if I carried that cross alone, at least you would have your pride, even if not much else. Ogechi placed a hand on his cheek, gently turning his face towards her. Both of them were tear-stained, faces tired and worn. But I married you, she whispered. I am your wife. Marriage is not about suffering in silence. It's about fighting battles together. Don't you know that by now? Marriage means sharing burdens. Her voice broke slightly. Do you think I would have loved you any less if I knew you had troubles? Do you think I wouldn't have preferred pap and okra soup with honesty than chicken and jollof rice built on lies? Chris closed his eyes, leaning into her hand. I'm sorry, he said again. I thought I was doing the right thing. I realize now how wrong I was. I should never have shut you out. I should never have let it get this far. They held each other then tightly, both crying freely. One in repentance, the other in forgiveness and sorrow. It was the first true embrace they had shared in a very long time. And in that moment, years of pent up emotions flowed between them without words. They talked long into the night, sitting on the old couch side by side. Chris haughtily laid out the full story. How much had been paid, how much was left, but he had sometimes borrowed from one creditor to pay another, digging himself deeper. How many nights he had stayed awake, dreading a knock on the door or a phone call from a creditor while pretending all was well. He confessed how each time she or the children asked for something, it tore at him to say no, or he felt trapped by the duty to erase his father's name from disgrace. Ogechi listened, asked questions gently, and even scolded him a little through her tears, not out of malice, but out of hurt that he had shouldered such pain alone. For the first time, Chris did not react defensively or shut down when talking about money. He answered her questions and accepted her words, holding her hand and apologizing over and over. In that honesty, they found a strange sense of peace. The problems were not gone. The debt still had to be dealt with, but now the secret was in the open. There were no more wars between them on this matter. Ogechi realized that as terrible as the past years had been, at least now, she knew it was not because he wanted to punish them or because he didn't love them. It was because he didn't know how to share his burden. He had been a prisoner of pride and fear, just as she had been a prisoner of ignorance and resentment. In the silence, after their tears had dried, Ogechi rested her head on Chris's shoulder. For the first time in a very long time, they felt close. They both knew there was a lot of healing to do, a lot of trust to rebuild. But with the truth finally laid bare, there was also hope. Ogechi could feel it, a small warm light in her chest. They would face the future together now. As they finally prepared to go to bed, Chris held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving, for giving me a chance to tell you. I promise I will do better. I'll make this right if you stand by me." Ogechi squeezed his hand gently. "We'll make it right together," she replied. Indeed, they both sensed that this moment of openness was the turning point. Lack of transparency had nearly destroyed their marriage, but now honesty was beginning to mend it. They had almost lost everything, but out of this breaking point, something new and stronger was beginning to form between them. True to their word, the next day marked the start of a new chapter for Chris and Ogechi. The morning sun filtered into the apartment to find them already awake, talking quietly about practical steps forward. Their faces were still drawn and tired, but there was a newfound determination in Ogechi's eyes and a humbled openness in Chris's. First, Chris did something that surprised the children. He gathered Chibuna and Ifatu to himself and apologized to them. In simple words, he told his sons that he was sorry for the hard times they had been through. Though the little ones didn't fully understand everything, Chibuna nodded solemnly and said, "It's okay, Daddy," while Ifatu gave his father a hug. This small act of vulnerability touched Ogechi deeply. Next, Chris and Ogechi sat down with a pen and paper. For the first time ever, Chris showed her his financial situation. It was not easy for him. His hand shook a little and he kept saying, "I should have told you before." But he revealed what remained of the debts and the payment plan he had been following. They discussed how to balance things so that the family could be taken care while still addressing the debt. Ogechi suggested changes to their household budget. She had a natural knack for managing resources, something Chris had never really tapped into. Now he listened as she pointed out ways to save money without starving anyone, buying food in bulk at the market to get lower prices, incorporating cheaper but nutritious local foods like beans, sweet potatoes, and leafy vegetables into their meals, and cutting out any small unnecessary expenses. For instance, the few cigarettes Chris occasionally smoked to cope with stress. he agreed to stop those. She also had an idea. I can start a little business, she said, maybe selling akara bean cakes in the mornings or roasting plantain in the evenings, just something small from home to bring in a little extra money. Before, Chris might have objected out of pride, not wanting his wife to walk by the roadside, but now he nodded. If you're willing to do that, it would help, and I can assist on weekends to grind the beans or do the heavy work, he offered. Ogechi smiled, a genuine smile, and for the first time in ages, she felt hope blossom. They knew they also had to heal the rift with family. That very weekend, Chris took a deep breath and did perhaps one of the bravest things in his life. He went to visit Chijioke and Adora at their uncle's house where they had taken refuge. Standing before his younger siblings, Chris fought the urge to maintain a stern facade. Instead, he spoke from the heart. He admitted how wrong he had been to treat them the way he did. He explained in a way they could understand what he had been dealing with and why he had been strict about money. Though that still did not excuse his actions, he emphasized. Chijioke listened quietly, the hurt still evident in his eyes. When Chris finished, there was a heavy silence. Then Chijioke said, Dede, I forgive you. His voice wavered, and it was clear he had suffered too. He had carried guilt and confusion over being cast out. Adora quickly nodded in agreement, wiping her eyes. Chris embraced them both tightly, murmuring apologies. It wasn't an instant fix to all the hurt, but it was a start. He invited them to come back home anytime they wanted, even to move back if they wished. Chijioke decided to stay with their uncle a bit longer since he had started an apprenticeship nearby, but Adora chose to return home during the week so she could attend her school in town. When Adora did come back to the apartment, Ogechi welcomed her with an open arm and tears of joy. The children jumped with excitement to see their auntie again. The home felt more complete now, and the wound of that terrible day began to heal. Over the following weeks, life slowly improved. With more open communication, the household finances were managed better. There was still frugality. Debt don't disappear overnight, but it was sensible frugality, not the extreme stinginess driven by secrecy and fear. Ifato and Chibuna began to have regular, sufficient meals. They even regained the bit of healthy chubbiness that children ought to have. Ogechi's small business took off in a modest way. Every morning, she woke early to fry akara by the roadside in front of their compound. At first, Chris insisted on helping her set up the store and would watch the kids while she sold. Neighbors who had witnessed the previous drama were pleasantly surprised to see the couple working together and smiling again. Some became customers happy to encourage Ogechi's enterprise. The extra income, though small, meant she could buy fruit for the children or add some meat or fish to their soup a couple of times a week, taking pressure off Chris. In the evenings, the family developed a new routine. After dinner, which was now a more cheerful affair with everyone eating from the same pot openly, Chris would lead a short prayer of thanks. This was Ogechi's idea, to rebuild both spiritual and emotional bonds. One night during the prayers, Chris openly thanked God for his supportive and loving wife and children, and for a second chance to be a better husband and father. Ogechi squeezed his hand as he said this, and they exchanged a smile full of understanding. As the trust grew back, so did the laughter, not overnight but bit by bit. The children started to act like children again, playing and making little jokes. Adora would tease her big brother Chris good-naturedly, calling him Oga Saver sometimes, which made him chuckle and shake his head at himself. Even Chijioke, when he visited on weekends, found a happier atmosphere and would bring buns or biscuits for the kids without any need for secrecy. One evening, the whole family, including Chijioke, who had come by after work, sat outside in the compound enjoying the cool Owerri breeze. The kids were chasing each other and giggling. Chris sat on a bench with Ogechi by his side, her head resting on his shoulder. They watched the children play, and Chris quietly said, "Thank you." "For what?" Ogechi asked, tilting her head curiously. "For staying with me," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "For helping me find my way back." She reached for his hand and held it. "We found our way back together," she corrected gently. In that simple moment, under the darkening sky, with the first stars appearing, their hearts swelled with a shared contentment. They had walked through fire and come out stronger. The house that was once filled with hunger and suspicion was now filled with the aroma of cooking food, the sound of children's laughter, and the easy conversations of a couple who had rediscovered their partnership. They both knew there would still be challenges ahead, debts to finish paying, dreams to rebuild, but they would face them side by side. The fear and secrecy that had nearly broken them had been replaced by honesty and understanding. As the months went by, their situation continued to stabilize. Chris even got a small promotion at work, which helped accelerate the debt payment. By the time another year passed, he was finally able to announce that the debts were fully paid off. There was no celebration bigger than the smiles and tears they shared privately for reaching that milestone together. One night, around the anniversary of the night Ogechi had almost walked away, she and Chris sat together reflecting. They remembered how close they came to losing their marriage. "It's almost hard to believe," Ogechi murmured, running her fingers over Chris's now healthier looking hand. "I was ready to give up completely." Chris's face grew somber at the memory. "I'll regret pushing you to that point for the rest of my life," he said softly. "But it taught me the most important lesson. Never again will I hide my problems from you. I nearly lost everything by keeping secrets." Ogechi nodded. They had learned in a painful way that open communication builds mutual trust and reduces misunderstanding. By being transparent, they had found not judgment, but support from each other. It was a lesson they would carry forever. She smiled and added, a bit teasingly, "And I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, running a business and a household. Perhaps if not for all this, I wouldn't have discovered what I'm capable of." He chuckled, slipping an arm around her. "You are strong, Oge. Stronger than me in many ways, and I thank God for you every day." In the gentle glow of that evening, with their children sleeping soundly in the next room, Chris and Ogechi knew their marriage had been tested by the worst of storms. Yet, out of near divorce came a renewal. The home that had once echoed with hunger and resentment now rang with laughter and love. Their marriage, once crushed under secrecy, found life again through honesty and understanding. This story teaches that a marriage is not a place for pride and secrecy, but for honesty, teamwork, and care. When partners hide their struggles, even with good intentions, the whole family suffers, especially the children. Speaking the truth early, asking for help, and planning together can turn hardship into progress. Real leadership in a home is not about control or saving face. It's about protecting your family's well-being, sharing burdens, and making small, consistent choices that rebuild trust, dignity, and love. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Ogechi and Chris on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired with their journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.